I'm Thomas Allen, a shareholder in Greenberg Trorig's International Arbitration and Litigation Group. Welcome to our second video in our issue spotting series. Today I'm going to touch on the world's largest free trade deal, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. The RCEP was signed on November 15, 2020, after 8 years of negotiation. The trade pact includes 15 Asia-Pacific countries comprising 30% of global GDP, as well as about a third of the world's population. The member countries include China, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and 10 countries from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, including Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Myanmar, the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. India was originally part of the deal, but pulled out in July. This deal is complex, and many of the rules it references have yet to be formally established or agreed upon in detail. This video shouldn't be taken as more than an introduction to a topic that will occupy many hours of study to fully understand. The information on these slides comes from publicly available resources, most notably from the governments of Singapore and Australia. Here's your quick overview. Notable features of the RCEP include uniform rules of origin to access tariff preferences for trade between member countries. The agreement includes improved mechanisms for tackling non-tariff barriers in areas such as customs procedures, quarantine, and technical standards. The RCEP will establish high-quality rules for the supply of services between the parties, including obligations to provide access to foreign service suppliers, to treat local and foreign suppliers equally and at least as well as suppliers of any other non-RCEP country. The agreement provides enhanced rules on the supply of financial services, which will facilitate business operations across the RCEP region. The agreement provides the establishment of a framework of rules to govern trade in and the access and use of telecommunications services across the region. The agreement will enhance cross-border movement of business people through commitments relating to the processing of applications and enhanced transparency of requirements for entry and temporary stay in RCEP countries when traveling for business purposes. The agreement includes a separate annex on professional services for the purposes of recognizing and removing barriers to providing those services. The agreement provides greater certainty and confidence to investors by locking in existing conditions, including rules for encouraging investment and prohibiting discrimination against foreign investors from RCEP countries. A most favored nation commitment will also reduce the likelihood that investors from RCEP member countries will face greater barriers in RCEP economies than investors from other countries. Although the agreement does not provide for investor-state dispute settlement, member countries have left this question open for future discussions. The RCEP will include core investment protections, including rules requiring payment of compensation where an investment is expropriated, fair and equitable treatment compensation for losses due to conflict and civil strife, and free transfer of investment-related capital without delay. RCEP countries have agreed to preserve their right to screen investments in the national interest, and the agreement will not affect the right of countries to take actions to protect their essential security interests. The RCEP will provide modern rules on e-commerce, protecting businesses and consumers. It will establish rules for transferring data across borders and limit the scope for governments to impose restrictions, including the requirement to localize or store data. The RCEP will establish protocols to protect consumers and their personal information. It will establish a common set of rules on intellectual property protection and enforcement for the RCEP region. The agreement calls for improving transparency and a cooperation among the member countries on procurement by central governments. The agreement will also include provisions on competition, which will require the parties to maintain competition laws and regulations that prescribe anti-competitive activities and ensure independent enforcement. In terms of takeaways, I think there are a couple of things to emphasize as we continue to evaluate this historic deal. First, we see that there are no provisions that allow investors to arbitrate claims over treaty violations. So-called ISDS provisions are referenced for future discussion, but nothing is yet agreed to. Second, the scope of this agreement will give multinational companies additional options when it comes to manufacturing and moving goods in the region. This could cause some shuffling of manufacturing capacity and continue the rise of Southeast Asia as a manufacturing hub. Finally, I think a huge question is how does the United States respond if it does? Some commenters viewed the exploration of the RCEP as China's response to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was being cultivated and negotiated by the Obama administration. When President Trump took office, he removed the U.S. from TPP as a part of a shift toward U.S. unilateralism and protectionism on trade. TPP did not die. It was reconstituted as the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership that did not involve the United States. This signifies a larger global trend that essentially saw countries take affirmative action to remake their trade partnerships rather than wait for the United States to return to the free trade posture that had dominated the past 40 years. All eyes will now turn to the incoming Biden administration and whether the U.S. will return to seeking free trade agreements or whether it will continue to cede ground to other global players in this area. Thank you.